It had been just another rainy Tuesday when Evelyn Harper, a 26-year-old waitress with tired eyes and dreams shelved too long, was assigned a last-minute catering shift at an exclusive estate nestled in the hills outside the city, a place whispered about by staff at her diner, but never seen in person. A mansion owned by some reclusive millionaire with a rotating list of mistresses, parties, and staff who signed NDAs longer than resumes. Evelyn didn't think much of it as she tied her hair into a bun, straightened her apron, and grabbed her keys from the hook beside the peeling doorframe of her one-bedroom apartment, her shoes wet even before she reached the cracked sidewalk. The rain clung to her like a warning, but she ignored it after all. It was just another job, one more shift to cover her mounting bills, her little brother's tuition, and her mother's medication. So she drove the borrowed car up the winding drive, without wondering why her name had been personally selected for the job. The estate, when it came into view, took her breath: marble columns, towering windows, and a circular driveway lit like a movie set. The kind of place she imagined existed only in the glossy pages of design magazines she flipped through during late-night diner cleanup. Inside, the catering team bustled like bees in a hive, unloading silver trays and vintage wines, while Evelyn followed the event manager's barked orders toward the library, a place guests wouldn't be allowed, that needed to be prepared just in case the host requested it. As she stepped into the room, dark wood shelves, antique carpets, and a grand fireplace that crackled with curated warmth, her eyes locked onto something that made her heart stop mid-beat. A portrait hung above the mantel, a hyper-realistic oil painting of a blonde-haired girl in a blue dress, no older than 6, sitting in a garden swing with a locket around her neck and a smile that only barely masked sadness. And Evelyn staggered back because that girl, that unmistakable face, was her. Not a child who looked like her, not a coincidence of features. That her, Evelyn Harper, as she had been at 6 years old, in a dress she still remembered wearing during one of the foster placements that hadn't lasted longer than a few months. A dress sewn by the only woman who ever braided her hair with love. She blinked hard, her hands trembling as she moved closer, her mind reeling with impossible questions. How could a painting of her, from a time no one had captured in photos, be hanging in a stranger's mansion? Why here? Why now? Who knew her so intimately that they could have commissioned such a thing? And more importantly, why had she never known? Before she could move, a voice startled her, deep, smooth, commanding. "You found it, didn't you?" And she turned to see a man standing in the doorway, tall in a tailored navy suit, with the kind of presence that silenced rooms. He was perhaps in his mid-30s, striking in a way that made you forget your own name, and his eyes locked on hers with such intensity she couldn't breathe. "Who are you?" she whispered, her throat dry, her thoughts spinning. But instead of answering, he stepped closer, his gaze shifting briefly to the painting, then back to her, and said, "I've been searching for you for 20 years, Evelyn." And the ground beneath her seemed to drop away as the room spun with implications she wasn't ready to face. He introduced himself as Nicholas Callahan, son of the estate's former owner, a billionaire who had passed away 2 years prior, leaving behind a complicated legacy, vast wealth, and a mystery he tasked his son with solving on his deathbed. A mystery that began with the disappearance of a little girl who had been briefly adopted, then vanished from the system under circumstances no one could explain. Nicholas explained that his father had been a different man in private than the media ever portrayed. Charitable, guilt-ridden, and haunted by mistakes he never publicly owned, including one he called his greatest regret. A child he had loved and lost due to a legal battle, a misunderstanding, and a corrupt caseworker. The painting had been commissioned after that loss, his way of keeping her memory alive, and it had remained in the library ever since. "But that's not possible," Evelyn said, her voice cracking. "I've never lived here. I've never. But even as she said it, memories clawed their way from the shadows of her mind. A swing set in a garden that smelled like lavender, hands helping her onto it. A man with sad eyes reading her stories by firelight. The taste of hot cocoa with cinnamon, and a sudden, violent night when she was yanked from bed by strangers who claimed she didn't belong there, that the paperwork was fake, that it was over, and then years of group homes, files lost in system crashes, names changed for protection, and any hope of that life erased like chalk in the rain. Nicholas watched her as the realization dawned, his expression unreadable but soft, reverent, as though he too had waited for this moment with an aching heart. And when she finally looked up, tears in her eyes, she asked, "Why didn't he find me?" And Nicholas said, "He tried, God. He tried, but you were gone without a trace." It was as though the system swallowed you whole, and she wanted to scream, to cry, to rage against every adult who'd failed her. But instead she just stood there, letting the truth root itself in her bones. The rest of the evening blurred as Nicholas cancelled the party that had been, planned a gathering of tech elites and minor royalty, saying only that something more important had come up. And Evelyn was ushered into a guest room that felt like a museum, given time to shower, rest, and absorb the impossible. The next day, over breakfast in a sunlit conservatory that overlooked manicured gardens and marble fountains, Nicholas told her everything. How his father had set up a trust for her, how the staff had always been instructed to watch for her face in the world, how he, Nicholas, had made it his life's mission to fulfill that dying wish, not out of obligation, but something deeper he didn't yet understand. "You were family, Evelyn," he said. "You still are." And as absurd as it sounded, she didn't feel disbelief. She felt something like a puzzle piece locking into place, a click that echoed through her soul. Over the coming weeks, Evelyn moved into the estate under no obligation but genuine invitation, helping manage a charity foundation the Callahans had long funded for displaced children, using her lived experience to shape better programs, becoming a bridge between the voiceless and the powerful. And through it all, Nicholas remained by her side, not as a savior, but as a partner, a man who listened without judgment, who challenged her when she doubted her worth, and who, on a golden autumn afternoon beneath the very swing, recreated from her childhood memory, confessed that somewhere along the way, he'd stopped searching for a girl his father lost and started falling for the woman she had become. They kissed under a sky streaked with fire-orange leaves, and it wasn't a fairy tale ending, because life had made them both too grounded for that. But it was a beginning built not on rescue, but on rediscovery. And in the stillness of night, when the mansion creaked like old bones and the wind whispered through the pines, Evelyn would sometimes tiptoe into the library, look up at the portrait of the girl she used to be, and whisper, "You made it home."